Coming up on Why Should I Trust You? If a new pandemic similar to COVID were to hit tomorrow and scientists developed a new vaccine in record time, would you take it? Today, we're going to hear from a group of people who describe themselves as vaccine hesitant. Before the pandemic, they say they generally had positive views of vaccines. Or, like many Americans, they simply didn't spend much time thinking about them. So what happened during COVID-19 that changed the way they view vaccines? Did they experience side effects? Were they ostracized for being initially nervous? Was it what they had heard about the mRNA technology itself, the speed at which the vaccine was created, or the way in which its safety was tested? Did they mistrust the scientists and the government in charge of delivering them? And if they no longer trust the doctors, scientists, and public health organizations that say vaccines are safe and essential at reducing severe illness and death, who do they trust? And who will they trust if and when a new pandemic hits? We have a great group conversation in store for you today. Let's get started. Hey, welcome everyone. We have a pretty foundational episode today, really digging into the why folks got to where they did. You know, we're going to bring in this terrific group of people made up of a few independent voters, a few Republican voters who would now call themselves vaccine hesitant. Some of them say they didn't always used to be this way, but their experience during COVID transformed them, made them more skeptical of vaccines. So what happened? They'll be joining us in a moment. But first, who are we? I'm Brenda Adhikari.
I'm Tom Johnson.
I'm Maggie Bartlett.
And I'm Dr. Mark Abdulmalik.
Yeah, Brenda and I are journalists, and Maggie is a virologist, and Mark is a physician and medical reporter. And remember, you can always reach out to us via email at questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net.
Okay, so like we said, we have a great group for you. They are rearing, ready to go. You know some of them are new. I think we're all going to learn a lot by listening to them about their thoughts about vaccines and the journey they've been on from before the pandemic till today on this. But first, Tom, help us get our heads around the bigger picture of America's relationship with vaccines, particularly the COVID vaccine, but vaccines in general between then and now.
So let's go back to the story of the development of the polio vaccine. It just seems in many ways that's still very much a part of our collective memory. And if we don't remember it, it definitely informs sort of our sense of how a vaccine in the face of a health crisis is supposed to come about. So we're talking the middle of the last century, after years of polio causing paralysis, death, and fear. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine using an inactivated polio virus. So in 1949, a group of other scientists made this Nobel Prize-winning breakthrough that allowed polio virus to be grown in a lab. And that paved the way for Salk to go to work on his vaccine. And he tested it in what was then the largest clinical trial in history. And that involved 1.8 million children. And they were called polio pioneers. And it was one of the great triumphs of modern medicine. So from the lab breakthrough that made the vaccine conceivable to children like eagerly lining up in school gymnasiums to get the vaccine, that took about 6 years. So fast forward 65 years, and we have this never before seen coronavirus spreading around the globe. In January 2020, Chinese scientists published the virus's genetic code. And researchers all over grabbed that. Within days, researchers had taken that code and were designing vaccine candidates using mRNA, which, is a technology that had been under development for decades, but had never produced an approved vaccine before. Within months in 2020, there was a large phase 3 clinical trial underway. So this really took off under Operation Warp Speed, a lot of coordination between the government and these big pharmaceutical companies. And before we knew it, tens of thousands of volunteers were being given either a vaccine or a placebo, and they didn't know which. By the end of the year, so less than 12 months, something like 362 days, the first COVID vaccines had received emergency use authorization in the U.S. And obviously, this is crunching a lot of history down and simplifying a lot of scientific research. But from the moment scientists made the critical breakthrough that made each of these vaccines possible, the polio vaccine took about 6 years to reach kids. The first COVID vaccine reached the public in less than 1 year. And for many Americans during COVID, the achievement felt like a modern equivalent of the creation of that polio vaccine. For others, however, what might once have been greeted as a triumph was instead met with skepticism, hesitation, nervousness, or outright distrust.
Yeah, Tom, like you mentioned, I mean, vaccines have eradicated smallpox, and you mentioned polio specifically. And, a lot of people call these some of the greatest achievements in medical history. And in our modern lives today, we see some effects of vaccines like dramatically reducing the incidence of, once common diseases like certain forms of meningitis. We talk about liver cancer and cervical cancer rates coming down because of vaccines. But what's interesting to look at is the public reaction to all this. It doesn't necessarily match what we're seeing today in our political divisions. So just to go back a little bit to the height of the pandemic, in May of 2020, scientists, like Tom said, raced to develop a vaccine. And at that point, 72% of Americans said they intended to get one. Now, that same survey found that about 2/3 of adults said putting a vaccine through a clinical trial, which is, the framework to get it to market, to make sure that they are safe and effective, was very important, even if it meant taking longer to develop these new treatments. And interestingly, it was Democrats who placed more importance on the clinical trials than Republicans. So 74% of Democrats said clinical trials were very important, compared to about half, 54% of Republicans. But again, that May survey was before we had even heard the phrase Operation Warp Speed. I mean, there were pockets of lower support for the vaccine, and that was in populations that are often skeptical of mainstream medicine and public health measures. Black Americans, long history of public health and mistrust in that population. And in a new wrinkle, white evangelicals were showing some hesitancy as well. So now we're in September of 2020. We haven't had a vaccine, rolled out just yet, but the numbers of those intending to get the vaccine had dropped by more than 20 percentage points. And that was across all groups. So only about half of the Americans were saying that they had planned to get vaccinated. And here's a part of the story that sometimes now, 2026, looking back, we forget. President Trump was among those who view the rapid development of the COVID vaccine as a historic scientific achievement. So go back to November 2020. Again, we didn't have the emergency use authorization. We'll talk about it until December. But November 2020, at a Rose Garden event, he highlighted the speed of Operation Warp Speed. Quote, "The average development timeline for the vaccine, including clinical tests and manufacturing, can take 8 to 12 years. Through Operation Warp Speed, we're doing it in less than 1 year." I mean, that is a scientific achievement. He called the achievement 5 times faster than the fastest prior vaccine development in history, describing it as something that would have taken years under a different administration. So today, of course, we know that the speed of this vaccine's development may have been its Achilles heel. That speed is the major point that led to mistrust among many communities. So here we are. It's about to be, vaccine time for the public. Pfizer and Moderna both became authorized for emergency use, like Tom said, in December 2020. So what did the data show that led to this? The Pfizer trial had about 44,000 people. The Moderna trial, 30,000 people. Both showed around 95% efficacy. Now, a lot of times we ask, well, what does that mean? But it means if you were vaccinated, you were about 95 times less likely to develop symptomatic COVID than someone who got the placebo. We talked a lot about this on the show, about how that language came out. The trials found mostly expected side effects, injection site reactions, fatigue, things like that. There were a few similar adverse event rates in the vaccine and placebo groups, but these trials were not large enough, or quite frankly, long enough to pick up the very rare side effects and risks. So after the vaccine was rolled out into millions of arms, surveillance systems did identify some of those risks: myocarditis, the serious side effect, especially in young men, and a rare clotting disorder linked to the J&J vaccine, which was later discontinued. Federal health officials continued to conclude that the benefits, even with what we knew about these risks, outweighed those risks. But the fact that these problems emerged only after authorization and after millions of doses had already been given That became a significant source of public distrust, compounded by criticism of that speed, how quickly and clearly agencies responded, and whether people who experienced adverse events were given the proper support.
Yeah, and I think it's like really important for us to note that the overwhelming consensus here, based on the available scientific evidence, is that serious vaccine injuries are real, but they're rare. So their precise frequency can be really difficult to measure for us. And many who experience them feel like either they haven't received the attention that they deserve or that they're on their own outside of our medical system. And we've spoken about that on a few of our episodes. And while there's this large body of research that says these side effects are extremely rare, critics of the COVID vaccines believe this is still an undercount.
By late summer 2021, 26% of American adults had not received a COVID vaccine. And that's when Pew asked unvaccinated individuals if they agreed with the statement, "We don't really know yet if there are serious risks from COVID-19 vaccines." 81% of the unvaccinated population said yes. That described their views somewhat or very well. Pew read them another statement. "Public health officials are not telling us everything they know about COVID-19 vaccines." 8 in 10 of unvaccinated respondents said that described their views as well. So the unvaccinated, of course, were more likely not to see the virus as a major threat in these surveys. They were less concerned about getting seriously ill. They were less likely to believe that vaccination was the best way to get protection. 3/4 said changing health recommendations made them wonder whether officials were holding back information. And changing recommendations from public health made them less confident in those public health officials. Again, all that from the surveying at that time period. And among those who became skeptical of the COVID vaccine, the subject of natural immunity became a big point. And natural immunity, of course, is the protection the body generates after having had COVID. And it's real and can provide strong protection. But there are caveats, beginning with the health risks from getting COVID, which can accumulate after each infection you get. Around the time the WHO declared the pandemic over in May of 2023, KFF asked Americans whether they believed the statement, quote, "More people have died from COVID-19 vaccines than have died from the virus itself." 80% said that statement was probably or definitely false, but 20% said it was probably or definitely true. And when KFF asked the question again more recently, the share who believed the claim that more people have died from the vaccines from the virus itself had gone up 7 percentage points.
Now, this picture is not like a universal rejection. Most Americans still reject that idea that vaccines are more dangerous than the diseases they prevent. And large majorities of parents continue to view routine vaccinations such as that MMR and polio as safe and important. But COVID appears to have changed and maybe further polarized is a better word when we talk about how Americans think about vaccines.
Thanks, y'all. That was super helpful. So, to set the stage, we have a group of 5 people joining us in a minute. Some of their names will be familiar to you, some of them will be new. They are Aaron Everett, Jeff Hutt, Lori O'Connell, Daniel DeLuca, and Terry Dixon. You will first hear each one introducing themselves, and then we will get into our conversation about how their views on vaccines and on trusting public health authorities changed after COVID.
Hello, my name is Jeff Hutt. I'm from the Gulf Coast of Texas near Corpus Christi. I think I'm on this call because, one, I was the national field director for the RFK Jr. campaign, and I had no issues with vaccines until COVID hit, and my real issues kind of started to come to an head because of the civil liberties issues.
Hey, I'm Aaron Everett, and I live in Colorado. I'm 51 years old. I think I'm here because I have some skepticism around the sort of industrialization of medicine, and COVID certainly accelerated that particular thought in my head.
I'm Lori O'Connell. I am 61, soon to be 62 years old. I'm from Darlington, Pennsylvania. COVID really brought out the question of real science. I was vaccine iffy before that. When they brought that COVID one out, I was like, no.
I'm Daniel DeLuca. I'm from Athens, Ohio. I'm 33 years old. I think I'm involved with this is because, one, I was a part of the Kennedy campaign, in Ohio. But COVID was a time where, as a business owner, I experienced a lot of different things than I thought I was ever going to have to deal with as just running a bar in a college town. It was a new experience for me, and I told people, I don't know about these vaccines fully, but you should learn before you do anything, and that was kind of always my approach to it. So,
my name's Terry Dixon, and I live in Frederick, Maryland. I was asked to join you guys by a very special friend, Maggie Bartlett. My skepticism about COVID and the vaccines, I'm against them.
Okay, let's get started. Take us back to a time before COVID. What you thought about vaccines before COVID? Like, how would you describe yourself? Would you say that you were mostly trusting, that you kind of got them and you got your kids vaccinated? You don't really think too much about them. How would you describe yourself? Let's start with Jeff.
Well, I have 2 children. Both of them are fully vaccinated. I never once thought about them, questioned it at all. But before COVID, I really looked at those people who were against vaccines as I thought they were kind of a little bit crazy, anti-vaxxers. But in my world of kind of libertarianism, I was like, okay, this is fine. If they don't want to take vaccines, that's their issue. I never understood how that really affected me at all. So I was real neutral on it. And going into the COVID pandemic, if the vaccine would have been rolled out, it would have been done differently. I would have had probably a different interpretation and attitude towards it.
Lori, do you want to go next? How would you describe yourself on vaccines before COVID?
I had trouble with vaccines when I was a baby. So my children, even though they're vaccinated, were all vaccinated, not on the schedule that was recommended by the pediatrician. There are vaccines that my children did not receive because I felt that a natural immunity to certain illnesses was far more important than, putting something in their body that I didn't know what the total makeup was. So I'm very cautious when it comes to vaccines. I don't consider COVID to be a quote vaccine. And that's only because, to me, old school, vaccines eradicated the illness. The COVID vaccine did not eradicate it. It made it better. I had COVID. I had it twice. The first round, I did go to the hospital. I thought I didn't think I was going to make it, but I made it. But it reminded me of when we were little and we would get a horrible, horrible cold, and I treated it as such. Everybody in my house had COVID once, twice, maybe 3 times, but we survived.
Aaron, tell us a little bit about who you were before COVID and how you thought about vaccines.
Yeah, I'm a pretty countercultural guy, generally speaking. So we don't do traditional health insurance. We do everything through a co-op, sort of a faith-based co-op. And because we do that, we learned really early on to start sort of talking and shopping how the medical system works. And so, every choice we make costs us out of pocket. So we're pretty conscientious, I guess, about how we proceed with any of those things. So prior to it, our 2 oldest kids, we kind of went through the whole vaccine schedule just as it was kind of required. And then I think as time went on, we started to ask more questions about why we were doing each of these individual multiple layers of vaccines. And it really kind of came down when they were in teenagers. There was a conversation around, and it was even kind of preteen. They were talking about a sexually transmitted disease vaccine, and my wife and I both just kind of said, "We're not interested in that. We don't want to do it." And that really raised a lot of questions with the doctor at that time, which made us kind of start to shop for a different doctor because of the way that we were sort of pressured, I guess, in that particular space. And so prior to that, we had some skepticism and some reservations about vaccinations. So kids were vaccinated, but also we have 4 kids. So there's a hybrid of that by the time we got to our 4th kid. And then when COVID came, I had already sort of, because of where I kind of sort of stand in terms of politics, always skeptical about how things are kind of proceeding and sort of the corporatism associated with everything. And that one just felt like it was definitely this collusional conversation between an industry and something that felt a crisis. And I'm not a very big fan of making decisions when time and duress are pressured upon me. I don't like what that does. I think it really makes us choose things that we wouldn't otherwise choose if we were given an honest and open opportunity to look at it and see it in a full spectrum. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And that's sort of how my journey through COVID happened with the vaccine. I never got it. We didn't get it as a family. Won't get it in the future, and it's not of interest to us.
Thank you, Aaron. Terry, tell us a little bit about yourself, before COVID, how you felt. And I really want to get to that specific piece about how you felt about vaccines before the pandemic. Were you somebody that kind of went along with what the doctors and what, folks had recommended?
Well, first of all, I'm single, never married, and I don't have children. Okay. I'm 74. And when I was growing up, there was like 6 or 7 vaccinations that we needed to get. And one was the mumps, the measles, and things of that nature. And I still got them. So I wasn't sure about it. So that raised questions for me as a kid. And then later on, they started adding more and more vaccines to the children. And now I have a nephew that's got autism. And that stood me up to pay attention. I absolutely quit taking any vaccines. Past few years since COVID, I took one vaccine, and that was for pneumonia. And guess what? I got pneumonia. And I thought, this is crazy. Now,
did you go to the hospital, Terry? I'm just curious.
No, they sent me home. And I had COVID twice as well. And when I went to the hospital, they did absolutely nothing but give me one of those things to put on your finger and check my oxygen level. And I thought, well, what kind of care is this? So I started doubting a lot of things that caused me to stand up and listen. And I ended up listening to a lot of other talking heads on the radio and everything, and on Zoom meetings like this. And just to be out there, I listened to X22, Red Pill 78, The Praying Medic, and Dan Bongino. And I really got indoctrinated with it. And I thought, whoa. After the vaccine came out, I wouldn't touch it. I still won't touch it. I've known many people who got sick from it. And I do believe that the pharmaceuticals are making a heck of a lot of money.
Danny DeLuca, do you want to share some of your thoughts on kind of pre-COVID, how you felt about vaccines?
Yeah, sure. So before COVID, I never even questioned or thought vaccines didn't even come up. I would just take them. Never even I also travel a lot. So anytime I was going to go travel, like what vaccines do I need to take? Okay. There was no thought, questions, or concerns for me. I even have people who brought up the autism thing, and I just kind of looked the other way. I was just like, well, I don't see a correlation. Like that was how I was, during that time. Yeah. Now I will say one thing was mentioned on this was the flu vaccine. When I was growing up and until COVID, no one around me ever referred to it as a vaccine. They always called it the flu shot or a booster shot or an immunity shot. No one ever said vaccine when it came to the flu. So that wasn't terminology that I personally was used to talking about the flu. The flu was just kind of a shot you took because you wanted to increase your immunity to the flu, fight it off, not necessarily you could still get it. Like that I understood. Vaccines, as far as I understood at the time, you take it, you don't get it, and you move on. Like if you get the vaccine, you're not going to get the sickness. That was my average understanding of vaccines at that point, because again, I was someone who didn't really bother looking into it because wasn't anything I even thought about. So during COVID, things kind of changed, I guess, as far as that went on. I have a strong immunity. I'm in the service industry. I've been around people my whole life. So I don't get sick that often. I don't get colds that often. Like it's just not something I really ever have to worry about. I also do a pretty decent vitamin regimen to keep, fight against these kind of things. So I didn't get the vaccine. I didn't see a reason for me. And especially early on, it was there wasn't as many, so I wasn't going to take one when I knew I didn't need one, and that maybe an elderly person needed it or somebody else needed it. So I really didn't have an interest in doing it early on. But I continued to do research on it and kind of study it. Because my immunity is usually strong enough, I didn't really see a reason in getting it. And now afterwards, I've seen a lot of people with myocarditis and issues like that who did take the vaccine. Like I said, I have a college bar, and I've had 3 college age students have myocarditis in the last, since COVID. And for the 5 or 6 years before that, never, not once. When you see something like that, it's hard to ignore, I guess. So would I take a future vaccine if like typhoid mutated and they said you need to take this vaccine if you're going to go to Asia? Yeah, I probably would do that, based off of the type of vaccine it was or whatever. So I'm not against vaccines. It was just this specific COVID mRNA that drew a lot of questions for me.
Yeah, you guys have kind of touched on a lot of just interesting history here, your personal histories with the COVID vaccine. And it seems like there's some buckets here. Some people, I think, question the need for the COVID vaccine. We talked about natural immunity being more effective, whether this was actually definitionally a vaccine in the first place. Others talked about having profound problems with the rollout, which obviously is taking us to sort of your liberties, collusion between the government and private industry, and then, pressures to make decisions, not giving people time, perhaps the public not understanding enough about this. So, Terry kind of moved a little bit into, was the COVID vaccine itself a health danger? And Danny touched on myocarditis as well. So I just want to do like a show of hands. When we're talking about health, raise your hand if you think in the end of the day, the COVID vaccine caused more health harm than the virus itself. Okay, so just for our listeners, we've got 4 out of 5, right? So 4 out of 5 of our participants today in this conversation believe that the COVID vaccine caused more harm to people's health than the actual virus itself. So I just want to explore that a little bit with folks, because we see studies, peer-reviewed studies in prestigious journals that say upwards of 2 million US deaths were prevented just in the first 2 years of having this rollout of this vaccine. So there's sort of just a completely different conversation that's going on. But here it feels like the conversation is the vaccine caused more harm than good. Who wants to take that? Just raise your hand if you've got a point about why you believe that to be the case. I saw Lori.
While it may have saved 2 million people at that time, the effects from those shots in the future, I would question how many of those 2 million people are not suffering drastic health issues from that. My best friend of 40 plus years, she chose to take 2 of the shots, the first 2, to protect her for her dad, who was elderly, healthy, had a heart attack on my birthday, ended up having open heart surgery at the age of, I want to say she was in her late 50s. No history of heart issues in her family whatsoever. I have an aunt, or had an aunt, who never took the vaccine or the shots until later. First shot, 2 weeks later, she died from a heart attack. Never had heart problems. So, you can say what you want, and I agree to disagree with people. I do. Because, everybody is entitled to their own opinion. Everybody had to do what was right for themselves. Unfortunately, I think that at the cost of perhaps many lives, they made those decisions to take those injections. And I think that you're going to find, like with the myocarditis, you're going to have future issues. I don't think that we're far enough out yet, especially because they keep giving them, a yearly update. And every time you put that into your body, what is it changing? What is it doing?
Right. So, Lori, do you feel like we just haven't seen this wave of sickness, or do you feel like the gatekeepers of information about medicine, about science, about health are sort of undercounting this? Do you think it's occurring now, or do you think it's a future thing that's going to come?
I think that science today, follow the science. That was the big push during COVID. Follow the science. Well, my science following appears to be different than a lot of other people's. And I'm old school. Okay. I had mumps, I had measles, I had it all. And I'm still here to talk about it. So I do question a lot of these vaccines that they put out. I don't take any. My doctor, I have a compromised immune system. I choose to handle that naturally. My doctor would like me to have the shingles, the pneumonia, the flu, all those. I said, no, I'll take care of it. And I do. I did the same protocol for COVID was the same protocol that I use for my life every day. And that is stay out of places that are crowded, avoid the sickest times of the year. It's great because you have grocery delivery now, so you don't have to go around all the people that are, sick. But, and then wear a mask. Those masks did nothing. So I just believe that there are two parallel sciences running in this world. There's the old science that was the real science, and then you have the new science where it's just take it. It'll save your life. Damn the consequences of what the side effects are. You need to take this and you need to do it now.
Lori, you mentioned two parallel sciences. You also mentioned we can just agree to disagree. And I want to turn it to a few other people to get their take on kind of that concept, because I'm listening to a lot of what you said, and I hear these things in exam rooms all the time as a physician, and I hear the experiences behind your concerns, and I understand why you have questions. I also talk to a lot of people who do believe in vaccines, and I just want to be clear with our listeners. I mean, a lot of the things that you've heard here, we have an entire body of evidence that doesn't match up, and I have a question for people here in this call. Maybe Jeff, we can start with you. When you hear a doctor say, look, I hear what you're saying and I understand where you're coming from, but what you're saying just doesn't line up. Some of the conclusions you're drawing aren't supported by the evidence. And I want you to answer that question. If somebody is telling it that you trust, it's a doctor you trust, or one of someone says, what you're saying, I hear you, is difficult, but it's just not supported by the science. So, we heard about, somebody got a pneumonia vaccine and got pneumonia, or, there's lots of different kinds of pneumonia, by the way. Or you hear, you need to be a strong immune system, so don't get the flu vaccine. Well, we know that some healthy people have problems with the flu. Jeff, how do you leave a conversation, or what do you take away when a doctor tells you what you're saying is just not supported by the evidence?
Well, I think what we look at is we talk about people here, a lot of us who were before COVID, were very open to vaccines and open to doctors. And I think what has happened is medicine has, in these studies that you're referring to a lot of people, they begin looking at them as tobacco industry studies. And a lot of people feel that the studies that you're quoting or where you're getting your information from is biased science promoting a certain agenda. And I'm not saying that's necessarily true. And I know that a lot of these things are peer reviewed. But I think what it comes down to is you can have science say one thing and you can have people believe something that is not what medical science says. And my personal feeling on this is that somebody's individual attitude can be different than what a medical study is telling them, and that experience is real. The real question about vaccines is, does taking it for that person, is it only going to affect them, or is it going to have a spreading effect where it's contagious and it affects other people?
But what do you mean by that, Jeff? That's fascinating. You're saying you're asking the question: if I take a vaccine and I have a health harm, can I actually spread that health harm to others who
No,
didn't
I'm
take the
saying
vaccine?
if I take a vaccine and the choice is either take a vaccine or don't take a vaccine. If you don't take a vaccine, you may get sick and you may have health problems, but that is only going to impact you. The way the COVID vaccine was rolled out was if individuals don't take the vaccine, you're going to be part of the problem. And to me, that's really where the line is drawn. I think individuals should evaluate science how through their own perspective and how they think best suits them.
Let me ask you on that piece. Is it not fair to assume that if you are vaccinated, your chances of spreading a disease become lower, say for previous diseases, right? That is there something in there that you can sort of understand the perspective that vaccination doesn't just protect you, but protects your community? Like that's often what people say, right? What goes through your mind when you think of that?
Oh, if it's something, I mean, I think vaccines in the past, we've been told that when it comes to tuberculosis and certain things like this, that we need certain medicines to stop the spread of it. And I think most people were okay with that. Polio was another one, but I think those were very, very much like understandable. But what's happened with the COVID vaccine when it came out, and I think really the shift that we see is because of the single vaccine. The rhetoric around it was that you're not necessarily stopping the COVID, but we're going to, it's going to be what's good for you. I have a little bit different perspective. As soon as COVID hit, PBS has a documentary called Influenza 1918, and it's a great documentary. And it talks about even during that time that the Spanish flu had gotten to every small hamlet in America. So my impression was going into the COVID that no matter what we were going to do to try to stop it, that it was going to have to spread through the community anyway, and that natural immunity was going to play some role in it. So I'm on a weird, I guess, a different level than a lot of folks where if a vaccine is rolled out and I see that it's taken time and there's been peer study and peer review of it, I'm much more likely to take it. But what we seem to be talking about here is distinctly like one vaccine, the COVID vaccine, as opposed to other vaccines.
I want to just before I get to you, Lori, I want to move us to one more place. And Lori, maybe you can take this, and then I want to go to Aaron on this. The idea of the speed at which the vaccine came out. We were talking in the intro to this episode. You know, President Trump in the beginning was really proud about how like short of a time it actually took to have this vaccine come out. I mean, it took less than a year from when the genome was sequenced to it kind of going from bench to market. And, you know, when you look at it as versus the polio vaccine, which took 6 years and things like that, what did that sort of speed of the vaccine, how did that sit with you? You know, again, as I said, there's a story in which that's a very positive, miraculous achievement. And then there's a story in which that really made people nervous. Lori, let's start with you.
I think that the rollout, as quick as they rolled it out, was part of the biggest reason that I questioned it. After, you know, it took years to roll out other vaccines. I think that the rollout was the biggest problem, because how can you assure without the proper testing that was a safe vaccine to take? You know, my whole family, grandkids, kids, no one took it. And we're all here today.
What makes you think that it wasn't properly tested? What didn't convince you that those clinical trials, you know, tens of thousands of people enrolled, that it wasn't properly trusted?
Because I believe that it takes a lot longer than a year to perform clinical trials on any medicine. Okay, let's use an example right now. They just started clinical trials on ivermectin and fenbid as far as cancer goes. Okay. Oncology is like, nope, don't take it. It's no good for you. Don't do it. But I've read studies where it's worked for other people. Okay. They are just now coming on board where they're starting to study it. And they said, we are years away from being able to say, yes, it works. No, it doesn't. Years.
Yeah, I mean, answering different questions, and you design trials based on, the question and then how fast you need an answer, right? And it depends on the sample size, and there's a lot of things about that. I mean, the trials to get the emergency use authorizations were on tens of thousands of people, but again, that was just the beginning of the process to look at. That was for safety and efficacy, but then there was the post-marketing surveillance. You talked about the myocarditis. All that got picked up by the systems that we have in place. I think one thing I'm hearing here is that, it's everybody is kind of described that, you find people who support your belief and you trust those people, while you can kind of find reasons to reject people who maybe you disagree with or don't, line up with what your value. I want to know what makes, maybe Teresa, what makes one source like credible to you and what makes something not credible? So if somebody's saying something, you don't believe them.
I've had many opportunities to talk to Maggie about things, and she has enlightened me greatly about this. But it's just some of these things. All the physicians who lost their license because they went against the standard protocol of the time and still issued ivermectin and that other drug that even President Trump took. So
I want to bring Aaron into the conversation as well on this issue. Aaron, let me just kind of center on a couple of things. One is, who did you trust at that time and why? And, what the part two of that is, when did you start to notice yourself really questioning what folks were saying during COVID? Like, what was happening that made you go, huh? And I'd love to put that to several of you.
I don't know that I have a great answer, honestly, about who I trust. That's a very complicated conversation in our era. I mean, I think everyone, and it really doesn't matter who it is, has some sort of aspect or element of their ability to get themselves in front of people. It comes with a lot of layers. I mean, whatever anyone does in terms of trying to promote themselves or trying to be out in front of somebody or try to get attention, you're going to have some element of it that comes with a layer of bombast or shock or kind of exaggeration. And during COVID, I honestly didn't really have a place that I felt most comfortable to go have a conversation about this with anyone. I didn't trust the media, but I also didn't really trust talk radio. I didn't really trust the newspapers. I wasn't in a position in which I was like, there's the guy that has the right stuff. Because I felt like no matter what, there were elements of people that were trying to ask the right questions. And those were the people that maybe seemed the most interesting to me. Some of the guys like on the Dark Horse podcast, my wife was really into them and they were kind of asking some of the questions.
This is Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying,
yep.
Who's been on our show, both of them, or Brett has been on our show.
Yep. And, I think at that time is kind of when I found RFK. I was interested in the people who were willing to at least ask a question about it. And that was more of how but I still wouldn't say that I implicitly trusted any of them.
Aaron, I want to move. That's fascinating to hear your journey. I want to move past all that, kind of cut through that noise. And let's say, God forbid, right now, you had a medical issue. You needed to go somewhere. Walk us through who you're going to trust and how you're going to figure that out. I mean, if you had something now, who are you going to trust?
I don't know. It's a great question. I don't go to a doctor. I haven't gone to a doctor since before COVID. I just don't have this inclination to do it. And so it's It's actually interesting, Mark, because like my wife has had some things in terms of just personal health stuff that are just, they're not troubles, like terrible stuff, but they're a nuisance. And so she's 54, trying to figure out who do you go talk to? Who do you go find? We have this giant skepticism around the whole thing. Just the whole industry has just felt, I said the word, it feels like an industry. It feels like there's something else there besides just the do no harm ethic. And that is really complicated for a lot of us. I think that's where we feel lost in much of this is I don't actually have anybody that I can go to. I mean, at this point, I'd call Dr. Craig Spencer because he's a friend. And that's like the best I could probably come up with to answer at this point in time, because I don't have anybody here. I don't want to go subject myself to it. When I have subjected myself to it or my wife to it, we walk away feeling not abused, but just really not settled in the situation. And so it does leave us in a vulnerable position because people do get sick. We will inevitably get sick. I'm 51. My journey to the end is a lot shorter than the journey I've already had. So I know that time is coming in which doctors will become a much more significant part of my life potentially. But I'm also just kind of at the place of like, well, this may just be the journey I end up going through, and whatever comes my way, we'll deal with. And we'll deal with it in a manner that is kind of a hybrid of a bunch of things. And it may not just be going to a doctor's office.
But Aaron, you feel like the system is so corrupted or rigged, the medical system, that it's better for you right now to not have a trusted doctor?
I don't know if I can say that I feel like it's better or worse. It's just the place that feels the least, it feels the least corrupted to be able to have multiple places in which to try to understand and get some answers. It might be some research online. It might be AI. It may be talking to a doctor. I mean, my wife's ended up in the emergency room a couple of times over this kind of particular issue. And so, we've found some people we actually really like and we've talked to, but also as soon as you do find that, it's never that you get to deal with that particular person in that industry. You end up having to go see a specialist, and then that specialist has another test clinic that you've got to go to. So it becomes this kind of, I love that South Park where it's like the American medical healthcare system, and they kind of go back and forth to all these different places and they're singing this song because it's like, okay, no, you don't really get it here, but you got to go over here. And then your insurance doesn't cover that. And because we're outside of the insurance system, we just have this, we really are very cautious and conscientious. It costs us money out of our pocket. So we're very, very reluctant to just bounce around and play this game. And so when you do find somebody you really like, you kind of want to talk with them, but that's not how the system actually functions. And that's really frustrating to many of us. I think I'm not alone in this. I think many of us are frustrated by that. And so ultimately you just kind of throw your hands up and say, I don't know that I want to do any of this.
Who's in the same camp as Aaron right now? He said he's super frustrated with it. He doesn't feel like he has anybody that he can trust to go to. If he does tap into the system, it's incredibly complex and sometimes just not rewarding, just either by show of hands or just kind of quick. Who else feels anything like that here on this call? Yeah. Jeff, you raised your hand.
Yeah. I kind of alluded to this a little earlier. It seems to a lot of people, and we're kind of talking about it, it's the ownership seems to be put on the people who have doubts, when I think it's really the ownership of this problem that we're seeing in the American medical science, American medical system, really comes from the medical side of it. And this is one of the things you heard a lot on the Kennedy campaign, and it's about corporate capture. And a lot of us look at what is going on through the junction between government and pharmaceuticals and these nonprofits like the AMA and these doctors associations as sort of a captured entity that looks at people more as in, can we extract, how much money can we extract from them, and what is the best way to do that, than actually is getting towards what's best for our health. And that's something that didn't arise naturally within people. It didn't arise from podcast or talk radio. I think that there's been a slow degradation of the American trust in the health industry. And I think this really, you can maybe look at where this started with the tobacco lobbyist and how smoking cigarettes were healthy at one time. And I think that's just cascaded over until we've gotten to this point. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I wonder if we have some sort of like internal gauge for ourselves, if we could each ask ourselves, like, when is like the distrust just become too broad or gone too far? Like, how will you know if what you're talking about is just a bridge too far? Because what I'm hearing is like a lot of people distrust the institutions. You mentioned the tobacco industry, but then you also heard Aaron say, you know, I know who I'll call. I'll call Craig Spencer. That's a physician who's been on our podcast. And, you know, I'm thinking about myself, and not to make this about me in any way, but like I see hundreds of patients a week, you know, and I know we all have physicians in our lives where, you know, you're spending, you know, lots of time dedicating to caring for people, you know, the public. And I want to know, like, where does like your distrust for those clinicians end? Like at one point, I mean, these are people who are deeply, you know, empathetic to their patients, and, you know, they might work in institutions or work in a broader scheme, but like where do you draw the line? Like,
no, I really think that what we're talking about is people probably have trust in their individual doctors. I know the doctors that I know I've trust in, but it's just, we go into the conversations now with our doctors, questioning the information that the doctors are getting and questioning what the doctors are actually promoting. And I'm kind of take this outside of medicine and let's take it to education. There's a lot of teachers out there who are really struggling hard. They got the best intentions. They want to do well, but they're performing within a system that does not produce good outcomes. So it's not personally about our doctors are trying to mislead us. At least personally, my doctors aren't trying to mislead us. Doctors aren't trying to do what's best for us. But the doctors are caught within the same system that we are in.
Lori, you had a thought.
I do. You know, when COVID hit, I still had trust in my doctor. When the derailment happened, and they said they had a webinar with all the local doctors and told them they weren't allowed to treat us. Symptoms, nothing.
Lori, let me
Nothing.
actually just let our audience in that Lori and her husband Wayne live very close to East Palestine, Ohio, which was the site of the chemical derailment that spewed a lot of toxic chemicals into the atmosphere.
And when I called my doctor and he told me, I cannot treat you, that was it. I knew right then and there that what JFK told us about these medicine being captured is true.
What, RFK Jr., you mean?
Yes, RFK Jr. I'm sorry. And he, when he told us that the system was captured, you know, I still questioned that. He sat at my kitchen table and told us that. And I questioned it. But when the derailment happened, I knew. The doctors were afraid. They're afraid to treat you. The government told them what to do. The company told them what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And you still, to this day, cannot get a doctor to say that any of your symptoms came from that cocktail of medicine or cocktail of chemicals that they sent over our homes, into our homes.
It really sounds like the East Palestine incident, you know, which happened in 2023, you know, it came while COVID was happening, and that didn't help at all in terms of building that trust. Aaron Everett, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to Mark's commentary, I guess, about just how does this all work and when do you draw the line? And I guess as I'm trying to think that through and process that conversation, my answer to that is that I actually don't know. That's part of my problem, is that I actually don't know where that line starts and stops for me. And I think that's really disheartening. But I also, if I'm making an analysis of it, I would say that one of the issues that we have, generally speaking, across all kind of corporate or public institutions in the United States is our insistency on efficiency, that everything has to be as efficient as possible, because the money is it doesn't go as far as it once did, or there are issues associated with it, or the insurance companies are involved, and there's this kind of make sure that everything gets done as efficiently as possible. And that moves in this really gray space of crossing that line between a doctor's care and compassion, which I never doubt about the person that's standing in front of me when they're asking these conversations. But then the transformation from, I no longer can have these conversations with you because I have to move on to the next thing, or I have to find a way that's the fastest solution. And this is part of an American patient issue too, which is I want a solution as fast as possible. So we need Ozempic, and we need these things in order to make sure that everything is just going as quickly as possible. And I think, and as efficiently as possible. And so drugs become a very easy answer for most things, when I think most people are going, well, I'm not sure I really want that as my solution, but I actually don't know that I have another thing. And I think we've been trained in this system to just be as efficient as possible. And so it makes that line really complicated for me to figure out where it is, Dr. Mark.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. I mean, I guess, God forbid there's an emergency, right? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And I think we all know the answer to that. You probably go to the ER, but.
Yeah. I mean, that's my choice right now. I mean, and in that, I hope that the person that's there is, which I genuinely believe that the person that's in that room with us at that particular time does have our best interests in mind. It's what happens through and after that process that makes me skeptical about how this all works.
Terry Dixon, you said you had a question.
The one thing that I have not heard mentioned, is that all the things that have evolved because people did not take the vaccine, like our military getting kicked out, things of that nature. You couldn't go to school unless you had the vaccine. You couldn't do you couldn't go to work. I mean, even the nurses that were treating this had to have the vaccine a year later in order to continue to work. And I know this is a political aspect of it, but it's something that I think really should be discussed, because this is where most of my distrust has come in. I'm a veteran. I go to the VA as my health care, and I still go to doctors and I still trust them. But I don't trust them on the vaccines because of all of this and what has occurred from our government shutting us down and doing things of that nature.
Terry, what would you have liked, in retrospect, what would you have liked to have seen? That the public health community, the medical community said, we believe in these vaccines. We believe this will keep you from having to go to the ER if, God forbid, you get infected with this virus. But it's up to you to decide what to do. Would that have made a difference about how you viewed the vaccine itself?
Yes. Yes, it would.
Why?
Because then you give it to me as my choice. You don't sit down and talk to me as to why I should take this and what is it going to do for me and what are the health risks by me taking it. That's not being discussed. And I really believe, I see the pharmaceutical commercials on TV where they end up reading out the risk of taking this drug that they have developed. And it goes all the way through, including death. And it's like, I believe in a God, I believe in the Bible, and I believe God made my body to withstand a lot of things. Those are some of my premises when I have been speaking. So I hope I'm making sense now. So thanks.
Does your personal uncertainty, is that more powerful to you than science? Maybe like a show of hands, like your personal certainty about a topic, about a specific thing, more powerful than science. Take it away, Lori. I want to know what you think about that.
Okay, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in 2012. It took me years to get a diagnosis. I went through the gauntlet of medications. So I landed on a medication, Xeljanz. Now, I took Xeljanz for probably 3 years, and I walk into my rheumatologist one day and she said, we got to talk about this medicine. Now, this medicine's been on the market for years. Suddenly, we have a black box warning because it causes blood clots. And she's concerned that I want to stop taking this medicine. I continue to take that medicine, but along with that, I also had to reevaluate my own health. I had to do the research as to what causes the rheumatoid arthritis. What can I do in my own daily living that will help to control the symptoms and the disease itself? Medicine is helpful, it is not always the cure all. You have to be responsible personally for your own, what you put in your mouth, what you put on your body, what atmosphere you live in, all of the above. So I think a lot of this comes down to personal responsibility. That's why I said when COVID came out, I was already practicing, washing my hands and staying away from people in the stores during the peak flu season, cold season, et cetera, so on, because I have to take personal responsibility for myself. If I'm sick, I'm staying home. I'm not going out there and infecting everybody else. Personal responsibility. And we've gotten away from that, I believe, in society, because now it's easier to send your child to school while they're sick because you have to go to work than to stay home and take care of your child for a couple of days so that they get over it, so that the whole classroom doesn't end up sick. And so where medicine does have its place, science also has its place. But it is I believe, our personal responsibility to do the research, put the time and the effort into looking into these different things to make that conscious decision. You can't make a good decision without information. And if you rely on one source for your information, I'm sorry, but I think that's a mistake.
Laura, it's a very, very interesting point. I want to ask Jeff this as well. I imagine many, 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 many doctors and public health folks would say having informed patients is a good thing. Having patients who are sort of locked in to what these decisions are and what's at stake and their role in their treatment and taking medication and reporting back side effects, all of that is a very good thing. But it almost sounds like Lori's describing a world, I almost call it like a Mad Max world, where it's on the patient to sift through the science, have multiple sources, read the literature, be super read in on these decisions, and to be their own advocate, to be their own expert in a way, to kind of gather that information to make a decision about taking a vaccine or not. Do you agree with that? And do you think that's a better place for us to be in as a society, or a worse place if we're all having to do this level of research and not trusting the medical community to tell us, we've looked at this, I've studied this for years, I believe the research says this is good or bad?
Well, I think it behooves any patient who's going through a medical situation to be very proactive in, one, keeping their own records, communicating with their doctors, their questions, having questions written down, because the current atmosphere within the medical world is really that we're trying to see as many patients as we can. So doctors are also kind of stressed in their time. So a very good interaction between doctor and patient, and the patient really staying well informed to what goes on. But I think what we're talking here is we're really talking about trust in our doctors. It seems like sometimes the distrust is put on us, which I don't think is fair. I think the distrust has been generated by organizations. I think mistrust has been generated by the medical field itself too, and some of this I think is natural. For a long time before we really had access to a lot of information, doctors were our only source of information, and doctors and pilots, they both have a little bit of a godlike complex, and I don't mean that in anything negative. I mean, I like that because they're willing to take charge. But I think a really good example of talking about where we went wrong and why people distrust medicine is this. A good example is when Dr. Fauci, who was the face of American medicine during COVID, came out and he told Americans to wear 2 masks. And that, to me at least, and I think a lot of other Americans, was so absurd that in many which ways it caused us to lose trust in the institution and lose trust what's coming out from it. So I would really like the conversation at some point that we need to start having is how can the medical institute and how can the medical industry regain American trust, and what steps do they need to take to do that? And I think that's important because we need to have trust in the medical system. And I just think right now a lot of Americans don't. And those Americans who are following along the normal steps of medical procedures are a little bit skeptical of what they're getting, but they're having to get this one because insurance is so narrow in its focus. Protocols are so rigid that people are going through the rigmarole with a little bit of doubt. So I think that the onus is not on us as individuals in America, but is actually on doctors and the institutions that support them.
Jeff, I think that's such an interesting point. And it actually moves us to the next part of this conversation. Let's just pretend it's the year 2035 and there's a new pandemic on our shores. Based on what you've said here, what do you think you are looking for from your public health authorities? And also, what would it take for you to agree to take an intervention like a vaccine in the case of an event like that? Aaron, why don't we start with you?
Well, we can all just hope that happens again, can't we?
It's going to happen again, y'all. We know it.
Lucky us. I guess I would just say on one level, there's an element to this whole conversation about what is our responsibility to the corporate, right? The public. What is my individual responsibility to that? I think that question hasn't necessarily been answered, which means that it turns into a political conversation, and politics is always sort of at the end of brute force. And who gets to make those decisions and how do they get to make those decisions? And so until we really answer that question from a fundamental perspective of what is my individual responsibility to the corporate, and when I'm saying corporate, I'm not talking about a corporation. I'm talking about the sort of the society we live in. What is my responsibility as an individual to the society, especially as it relates to my medical interventions? What are my responsibilities to the society? Until we really answer that, the only way we're going to be able to deal with it is in our system is politics. And that means that we're going to find ourselves deciding who it is that we trust in politics to be either the bully or the protector of my individual rights and my individual choices. And I think that's a really complex thing that I'm not sure we answer very well or can answer very well, because everything has become, everything immediately devolves to the political institutions. And that's really what happened in COVID. And you saw it. I mean, before the election, you had people in the Democratic Party saying that they would never take Trump's vaccine. They labeled it as Trump's vaccine. And as soon as the election changed and was won by the Democrats, you found them switching their tone and moving into this conversation that it needed to become a part of a mandatory thing, and that we were the problem. Individuals who were choosing not to get vaccinated were the people that were raining death upon the society. Until we answer that question, we're always going to move back to politics, which is always going to be divisive. It's always going to put us at adversarial positions with one another. We're not going to solve the problem about what is the individual's requirement to the society. it's an eternal question. It's one haven't been able to answer for a long time, but I think it's one that we as Americans have to wrestle with that fundamental and then make decisions about that. Our Constitution says that we have a right to ourselves, and our rights are inherent.
Just to pin you down a little bit on that, it sounds to me like what you're saying is in that situation, right, where another pandemic were to hit, that I think I can expand this to all of you, and I will go to some of you on this, is that you have a right to decide what you want to put in your body, obviously. And I think, let's be honest, that has been the case. No one can hold you down and put a vaccine in you. As much as people would like to think that happens, that does not happen. What is it that you feel like you want to hear from your elected officials? What is it that you want to see from public health in a future pandemic? Lori, let me go to you on this one.
The first thing I would do is turn off the television. I haven't watched the news in probably 10 years. Okay. I don't watch TV. I don't watch the news because that's where all the hype comes from. You have to go from multiple sources to make a good decision. And you said that nobody forces you to put a vaccine in your body, but yet they do, because your children can't go to school unless they have a vaccine record. So where do I get to make that choice that my child is either going to be vaccinated or not vaccinated? And, there's a struggle with that perpetually because they keep pushing certain vaccines, like it was chickenpox. Okay. Now, my youngest daughter did get the chickenpox vaccine when she was 14 years old because I tried to get her the chickenpox and she never got them. And I weighed what would be better, the vaccine versus her getting them when she's in her 20s. The vaccine won in that case, okay, because it had been out long enough and it did stop the chickenpox.
Lori, I want to ask you, because just back to the question about this scenario that was laid out about if there's another pandemic. I want to know how you feel about something. Like, are you happy? Are you worried that, let's say, the people who taught you not to trust medicine, you said RFK came to your table and told you that, the system has been captured. Like, that person and this administration has more influence maybe over your health than the doctors who actually, provide care. Are you happy about that? Are you worried about that? Is that who you'll turn to for information for the next pandemic?
No, I have the control over my health. I still have the right to say yes or no. I have the right to be able to research anything that my doctor recommends for me or says to me. I can say, you know what? I want to look into that before I make that commitment. I still have that right, and I will continue to practice that right to be able to say yay or nay.
Let me just, kind of rapid fire go around. If somebody were to say, well, you know what? Looks like we lost this group. You know what I mean? They're not going to trust us anymore. They don't like vaccines. They don't think that, there's nothing we can do, right? The majority of the country still feels very positively towards vaccines, that maybe we should focus on them and not focus so much on the group. What do you want to say to people who feel like they've already lost you? Do you think they've lost you? Do you think that there's anything that they can do to win back your trust? Jeff, let's start with you and then let's go around the horn.
Well, I am very worried about the next pandemic and worried that it's going to be severe and the rollout is going to be different and people are going to be untrusting of it because of the COVID. I think a lot would be not dictating. I think that the relying on previous medical science will be very important in the next go round. And actually, to me, I felt like a lot of the COVID science and the science around COVID was almost generated and created just for COVID itself. And I think we see some of this when Fauci talks about how he made up the 3-foot rule or how things will spread for 8 feet. But I think the next one, what's going to come down to is just my looking at what I'm hearing from the medical industry, and if it makes sense to the science that I learned as a young person growing up through elementary school and college, and if it conflicts with that, I'm going to be questionable, and I think a lot of people are going to be questionable. But like once again, it's the ownership to bring back trust is on the medical field. It's not on the American people.
Lori, what would you say to that? Has public health lost you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I agree with Jeff. What we were taught growing up in science versus what they rolled out, you know, it makes you question. My husband always says trust but verify. So if I trust something that is said, I'm going to verify it. I am going to verify it because I want to make sure that what I'm trusting is actually true. And we have the World Wide Web at our fingertips now. There's a lot of reliable sources out there that you can do research. Okay. What lost me in the very beginning of COVID was it was spread by a bat. Now I had a problem with that, a bat, because I said, how can that be? You're not supposed to be able to transfer viruses, some between humans and animals. And, if they want to put that out and say the next pandemic, well, I'm going to look at that and say, no, we've been down this road before.
What would it take for you to trust science and when I say trust science, we should always be skeptical, right? Even scientists are the most skeptical. But what would it take for you to feel united to want to defeat a disease and want to feel like you want to trust our leaders to feel like they have your back?
If what they're putting out matches what I'm researching and it coincides, okay, then I do believe, okay. I always believe this. If it doesn't make sense, it's not true. You have to rely on your own brains a lot. You have to realize on your own, you have to rely on yourself as far as what you've learned. The history teaches us for the future. And if we didn't learn something from that, things didn't match up and it made me question, and if it doesn't make sense, I don't believe that it's true. If it makes sense, I'm going to be more apt to agree and say, okay, yeah, okay, like the polio vaccine. I worked in home care. I took care of people that had polio and were affected by it. I have a friend who had polio and was affected by it. But I also see that it eradicated a horrible illness. So did I take the polio vaccine? Absolutely. Did my kids? Absolutely. Because it makes sense. I saw with my own eyes. They come to me and say, oh, we got this vaccine that we just developed based off of what happened in COVID for this new pandemic. No.
But Lori, I guess the question is, would you concede that what you saw with your own eyes might not be accurate, or what you're reading online might not be accurate? I mean, would you concede that this goes both ways, that maybe a virus can be spread to a human from a bat, and maybe the scientific research is right, and what you are experiencing and what you're seeing around you might have you feeling certain things, or putting things together that don't add up? Like, is that at all possible to you, or do you ultimately live now that you've got to just trust what you see with your own eyes?
You know what? If I don't see it with my own eyes or hear it with my own ears, how do I know it's true? I mean, yes, anybody could put a paper out. Anybody could say this, that, or the other thing. And that not, necessarily is not, the truth. But if you begin to research things and you see more things lining up, okay. Now, if I had seen research from the past where, viruses in bats had been transferred to other people in the past, I might be a little more apt to say, okay, that's a possibility. I might question that.
What if I told you there's somebody on this Zoom right now that has spent their career studying viruses being passed to humans from bats?
I would love to, if I could read their information, I would read it and I would take that into serious consideration.
Good.
I'm open to that. I'm not, it's not a black and a white for me. It's kind of a gray. I'm open to reading that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's Maggie. She studies bat viruses and going to humans. I want to keep going around the horn here. The one theme I'm picking up on is the idea that like if I'm not convinced, or that if I don't believe or what the researchers are saying, or if it doesn't make sense to me, I'm not gonna, like, I don't need to do it, right? And I'm trying to square that with how we view other forms of expertise in our lives, like when we go onto a plane, for instance, or when we have a plumber in our house, or you I think for a lot of public health researchers, and they say this, we cede our trust in people all the time, right? We trust people to do things for us in our lives all the time. And there are a group of people out there in public health who have signed up for this with very little pay, who have dedicated their lives to this, to wanting to save lives. Aaron talked about Dr. Craig Spencer. He's gotten to know him well. There's so many people like that we meet. And I think for them, it's a real head scratcher why it is that when they recommend something, that there's this immediate sense that there's something a bit conspiratorial attached to their motives, right? And I wonder if we might sort of talk a little bit about that what is different in this scheme of things. Danny, what do you think that is? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. So I think one big thing is, I think the word trust means a lot to people. Like it's a heavy hitting word, and it means like you'll get, like, for some people it means I'll give my life for that person. Some people take it to that extreme. I think maybe advisory or accepting, information from someone is a little bit better. For people to trust it's going to be really hard, especially if we have another pandemic, especially with AI coming out the way it is. It's going to cause a lot of trust issues, and people are going to see things online through AI and believe them, even though it's completely computer generated at that point. So if there's a next pandemic, there's going to be a lot more trust issues so like doctors aren't just going to be fighting against people who had issues from this one. They're going to be fighting with issues of just society in general at that point, and with illiteracy rates increasing across America and in the world, of people just not reading as much as they used to. There's going to be a lot of trust issues moving forward. It's hard to really figure out how you're going to make that work. It's really hard to just sit and be like, yes, we're all just going to open up and trust everyone because it's the right thing to do. In the future is going to be really hard. I think taking, me personally, I'm going to take advice from somebody who knows their field, like, if a doctor tells me something, most likely, even today, I'm still going to listen to them, and I'm still going to, believe what they have to tell me. I mean, I have a great relationship with my personal family doctor, and I'm not, they've been in the field way longer. They know a lot more than I do. And I'm going to definitely take what they have to say. And maybe I'll ask another doctor if I really have a question and see what their opinion is. But if I ask 3 doctors and they all say the same thing, then, that's kind of obvious to me.
Yeah.
So that's just my own personal opinion on it, I guess.
Aaron, what's on your mind?
I think some of this, as you listen to it, and I'm certain that anybody that's on public health side of this, listening to this, is like, everyone on this call is nearly nuts. And that's, like, I can understand why they would say it, and could certainly understand that sort of perception and feeling associated with that. I think I would look to this as one of the issues that's sort of come up in this is a conversation around, it moves into this almost metaphysical space between religion and actually sort of science or life. And they all kind of move into this space that occupies the same space as religion. That's for myself. I think my own belief. We hear a lot of that in this call. Like, it's my own belief. It's my own thinking. It's my own stuff. But you also hear that from the medical industry, that there's sort of like, or this kind of movement to the science is almost its own entity of something that has to be believed in. And I think, historically speaking, we don't done this very well. There's like people reject all sorts of stuff in this particular space between the line between religion and actual life. People reject that all the time, and there are things that we just can't. I'm not sure that we'll actually be able to answer and sort of have unequivocal answers for a society that are always going to match and always going to fit, because there will be people who just are not, who will refuse to believe it because of what's happened to them and their anecdotal experience. And that's going to just happen over and over again. And that would be the same as if you tried to talk to somebody about Christ, and who rejects it. That's the same space. And I think we have to really recognize that and understand that we have moved this from just a patient-doctor relationship because of media. Maybe it's because of the personalities that are involved. It moves into a space that feels much more religious to me. And I think that's something we have to answer if we're going to do this well. What do we do with that?
That is fascinating. Aaron, thank you for sharing that. Terry, what is your thinking on this in terms of kind of the idea of what would it take for you to trust public health in another pandemic?
I have had doctors that did the wrong thing. I just don't know what to believe. But when it comes down to it, I do believe in doctors. I go to them. And they help me immensely. But these pandemics are kind of scary stuff. And I've heard a lot of bad things about it that make me want kind of back off of everything and just go to my friends. And I've got some good friends that are very helpful, and that's really about it.
It makes you want to go to people you love and trust, and because it sounds
Yes.
like maybe the science and the medicine part of it is a bit just overwhelming.
I think that not just in pandemics, but if you go to the ER, they try very quickly to get you in and out, tell you what's wrong, and you hit the highway. And most of the time they're correct, but sometimes they're not. And it's usually about money. So you have the government overseeing things, you've got money overseeing things. What drug can we give you that's going to benefit the doctor or benefit the pharmaceuticals? There's a lot of distrust in that. But as far as I'm concerned, I still have the power to say no, that I don't want to take the vaccine if I'm afraid.
Terry, and for everybody, really, I mean, this call was about meeting people, and we met, 4 or 5 people here who were speaking honestly about their experiences, like what they're scared of, like what they're frustrated about. And like we said, some of it's not exactly in line with some of the evidence, and talking about that evidence, for all the mistakes that we've made as public health, for all the mixed messages we put out, all the mistrust and distrust that it appears that has been generated. Really, I think it's important for a lot of people to remember that public health is at its best imperfect. I mean, what we're doing is perfect is not the metric. It's imperfect work, and it's by people who are trying to protect people that they've never met, right? That's what public health is about. I think some of what we've done here is a little bit conflate like going to the doctor with what public health is, and that's just a whole other topic. But I think if people can take away that everything you've heard about is true for, these people in terms of their lived experience, but on the other side, what public health is doing is trying to protect people that they don't know their story. They never heard any of this. They're trying to protect a population, our community, a place that we all live in together. And I think it's important to hear both.
Thank you.
I'll say part of the reason why we have conversations like these is because they don't actually take place enough in our society. People frequently lump people with vaccine questions and hesitations as being anti-vax. Or like what Mark just said, people will lump everybody in public health as being, captured or, working for pharma or something. And the truth is what our show really tries to do is to kind of bring out the human in everybody in those situations. And so I really want to thank all of you for sharing your story. It's not easy. I know a lot of you told me, when we were planning for this episode, when you shared with family and loved ones your choices during COVID, many of them, rejected you and said that you couldn't come to Thanksgiving and things like that. And I really do recognize that. And I also hope that we can continue these conversations, because I don't know how else we work through this, and several of you have been on many of these episodes with us and had conversations. You always have a welcome space on this show. So a huge thank you to Aaron Everett, Jeff Hutt, Terry Dixon, Lori O'Connell, Danny DeLuca for joining us today on Why Should I Trust You? Thank you so much. That was our episode today. I am Brenda Adhikari. He is Tom Johnson. That was Dr. Mark, Maggie Bartlett. Please send us questions and comments to questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net. And leave us a rate, like, subscribe, all that stuff. And we will see you right back here next week.